Welcome to the Boomer Technician channel. We're still in Denver waiting for the good spring weather to go out to the car shows. So this week, I thought I'd talk a little bit about identifying cars built in the Boomer era from 1960 to the end of 1970s, those cars that are so popular with us Boomers. And I've noticed folks under the age of, let's say, 50, don't have an easy time identifying what year these cars were built or even what decade they came from. So I thought I'd share a few visual cues here with you and also talk a little bit about how the cars over the decades changed and how the manufacturer's approach changed, and give you a little bit better information on how to identify just exactly what year range a given car was built in. Now, from 1960 to the end of the 1970s was a very tumultuous time for the domestic manufacturers. Most of them started out the decade of the 60s just building one standard car, maybe two different platforms. And they'd change them every year. They'd modify the fenders, they'd change the grills. In a lot of cases, they'd redesign or restyle the dashboards inside the car. Well, as we moved through the 60s, we added compacts, the subcompacts, the intermediates, the personal luxury cars, and they were just building a lot more platforms by the end of the 60s than they were when they started out. So sheet metal changes really started to be reduced. They did a lot more carryover where they didn't change many features of the car from one year to the other. And you couldn't simply look at a car and say, well, this car is X or this car is Y. And because of this, we're going to talk about features that either became standard by regulation or manufacturers adopted it for styling purposes, and when those rolled out, to give you an idea of what range these cars were built in. And to do that, I'm going to show you certain models that showed these changes and how it affected the look of the car. And we're going to start back in 1957 when the manufacturers started using four headlights on the car, two high beams and two low beams. They started putting those on certain cars in 1957, but not all states had legalized the four headlight setup. So in 57, you might see a car with four headlights, like this 57 Mercury, and they'd also build a two headlight version, like this 57 Mercury, to sell in the various markets. So it got a little confusing, which is often true when styling changes and regulations intermix. But know this, as of 1958, if you see a car with four headlights, that car was built in 58, carrying on forward until the end of the 70s, when pretty much everybody had switched over to square headlights. Another change occurred in 1963 when they started allowing yellow turn signals on the front of the car. Up until then, all the turn signals had been white. So the Falcon enthusiasts know that a 62 Falcon has a white turn signal lens, whereas a 63 Falcon has a yellow turn signal lens. As of 1963, yellow turn signal lenses were allowed, but not every manufacturer went over to a yellow turn signal lens. Another regulatory change that modified the appearance of the car was in 1967 when reverse lights were mandated. Volkswagen went ahead and put a standalone reverse light on their car on the bumpers. But in 1968, Volkswagen made a number of changes to the car, and they moved the reverse light up into the taillight assembly on the fenders. Now, those last couple examples I gave you were specific to models and minor changes in a given year. But in 68, there was a significant change that was a regulatory change. So every manufacturer had to begin putting side marker lights on all their models. And most manufacturers punched a hole in the fender and hung a light on the side of the car. This 67 and 68 Dart demonstrate how the side of the car changed, how the marker light showed up. And so you'll know that if you see a car with a side marker light, it was built from 68 on moving forward. Now, one thing that was never mandated was the amber turn signal on the back of the car. To this day, manufacturers are building cars with red taillights that function for both the stop lights and the turn signals. But some manufacturers put yellow turn signals on the car for styling purposes, but didn't actually put a bulb in the yellow turn signal. Here's an example of a Chevy Vega from the mid-70s. It seems to have a yellow turn signal bulb, but you'll never see that bulb flash because there's simply no accommodation for a bulb to mount in the yellow turn signal section. The next big change was also a government mandate, and that was the 5-mile-an-hour bumpers. Manufacturers were required by the government to put better crash protection in parking lots on their vehicles, and there was a requirement for the feature to appear in 1973 and then to be fully formed and meet the regulation completely in 1974. And because of this, there's a lot of 1973 cars that just have the bumper moved forward to give it a little more crush zone, and the bumper itself looks like the previous year's bumper. In 74, most of the manufacturers put a much larger bumper on the car, and what do they call it? The park bench, a bumper you can literally sit on with a fill panel between the bumper and the body. And then moving forward into the 80s, manufacturers did a lot better job of integrating those bumpers into the car. They started putting them under a composite cover so that the shock absorbing bumper was mounted under plastic and it wasn't so noticeable. But if you see one of those big park bench bumpers, you're pretty confident that car was built from 1974 up until about 1980. The final change we're going to talk about is square headlights. Now, these weren't mandated by the government, but the manufacturers went over to it as a styling change. They liked the look of these headlights, and in theory, they could reduce the height of the front end for better aerodynamics. But in some cases, the manufacturers simply stacked them, which didn't lower the front end at all. So it was primarily a styling change. These headlights were allowed in 1975, but not every manufacturer went over to them immediately. Some carried the look of a car forward for a couple of years and then added the square headlights. And some manufacturers offered the square headlights on the upscale trims of the cars, but the base cars still got the round headlights. But moving into the 80s, almost every car had a square headlight on the domestic side, the exceptions being, oddly enough, the Camaro and the Corvette, which both had round headlights up until 1982. And of course, the trucks had round headlights moving forward. They were the fleet vehicles, so trucks carried on into the 80s with round headlights. So if you see a square headlight, you know the car was built after 1975, and then carrying forward in 1984, manufacturers started building aerodynamic headlights, as shown on this Mark 7, which was the first car with aerodynamic headlights. So square headlights pretty much run from 1975 till about 1988. I hope this helps you identify cars built from the 60s to the end of the 70s. It was a time I know the best. It was a time I was really watching cars. I used to look at the new model introductions every year, cars I'm very, very familiar with. And still years later, some of this minutia, these details, stick in my head. It's kind of interesting. But you know, the next time you're at a car show, you can say to your buddy, hey, that car must have been built after 74. It's got the square headlights, and your buddy will be really, really impressed. But while you're at that car show, remember this: no matter where you go, there you are. Oh, hey, for my fellow boomers out there, feel free to post in the comments any features or regulatory changes that help you figure out what age a certain car is. And if you know of a strange change that a manufacturer made in the name of the latest fashion or because of some regulatory requirement, post that up there too, because we just love to see those comments.